So I'm Sarah.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. So first I want to ask you if your name was, if you've changed your name since the war, or has it always, have you always had the same name?
Since, well, of course I was married, so I changed my last name. But otherwise, my name was, in my birth certificate, is Ingeborg Bertha. My maiden name was Cohen, C-O-H-N, and I married Weinberger, so that's when I changed my name, but otherwise I haven't changed anything. Except that most people call me Inge, you know, the Ingeborg is kind of long and formal, so everybody calls me Inge for short.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Germany, in a small community outside the city of Leipzig, which was in Saxony. And my father was a physician, and we were 7 children, 5 girls, and the youngest were boys. I was the youngest of the girls. And I started public school at the age, I guess, 6. And the public school was wonderful. It was right across the street from where we lived. So I just didn't have far to go. And in Germany, the school system was quite different than it is here. So I went 4 years to public school, and then I went to what they called höhere Schule, I mean a higher school, which you had to pay. I mean, it was no longer free like the public school. And it also was in town. It was not, I had to commute from where I lived to go to school, because it was in the Leipzig. And in order to enter the higher school, you had to pass an examination. Okay. So I started that school after 4 years. And the Nazis came to power in 1933. I was not quite 13 years old yet when Hitler came to power. And first thing that happened was on April 1st, 1933, there was a boycott of Jewish businesses and also Jewish physicians. And I remember they posted a stormtrooper was posted in front of the house where we lived and where our father had his praxis also, trying to stop the patients from going in, but they didn't succeed. I mean, patients remained with my father. And so I remember I belonged to a German sport club, which was where we lived, and was kicked out right away because I was Jewish. And so gradually things became worse. I remember the first year in 33, which was in April, was Passover was shortly after the boycott, and we always had a very big ceremony for the Seder. all the relatives came to our house who lived in town. And it was really a wonderful affair every year. And we didn't have it this year because my father was, I guess, so upset with what had happened. And but we were so unhappy that the following year we had it again. Everybody came. So
what was the sports club that you were in? Can you talk more about the sports club you were in?
Sport?
You said you were part of a sports club?
Yeah, that was, well, we did gymnastic and all kind of sports, swimming and so forth.
Which one was your favorite? Which one was
Well,
your
actually I was quite involved in sports as I grew up. In fact, after we kicked out, and there was a Jewish sport club which I joined, which was in town. And actually there were two. One was from the Zionist Maccabi Jewish sport club, and the other one was from the more German. I belonged to the German, was called Sportclub Schild. And I think it was really formed by, they had an organization of former Jewish men who were in World War I, who served, and they had their Jewish organization of former soldiers. And this sport club was formed by this group. And I joined it. I also joined a Jewish youth group, and it was called, it also was not Zionist, it was Bund Deutsch-Jüdischer Jugend, means Club of German Jewish Youth, translation. And we used to meet in town. They had a special home where all these different youth groups would have their meetings. And we would go on hikes on Sundays and stuff like that. And most of them belonged also to the sports club. And so I was very active in that, and I got very much involved in track and field and discus and all this kind of stuff. And I was pretty good at it. In fact, in 1935, it was possible to make for the youth a special sport thing, and you had to pass different things you had to do in order to get this, and I got this book, and this was to sew on your, it was a swastika. Still have it. And things progressed. In 1935, where the so-called Nuremberg laws were proclaimed, and which had the Aryan clause, if Jews couldn't marry Gentiles, and if you had one Jewish grandmother, you were considered Jewish. Even so, that's the rest of the family was not, but that was sufficient to stamp you as non-Aryan, as it was called. And then in 1936 were the Olympic Games in Berlin, and things were more relaxed. I was lucky enough, I went to Berlin and I got tickets to the stadium, and in As a matter of fact, I saw Jesse Owens win his 100-meter. And, well, but Hitler would not congratulate him. So, of course, he was a black man. And I wanted, really, by that time I was very much involved in sports, and I really wanted to go to a university to become, you know, a physical education teacher, but I was not able to stay. I mean, it didn't work. So I finished school in Germany. The school year started Easter time, and so of course it finished also. So I finished school in 37. In what happened before that my brothers, they were kicked out of school they were in, and they had to go to private school. And my oldest sister, who was at the university studying medicine, it was 1935, and she was unfortunately an ardent communist, and they were about ready to arrest her, so she and her boyfriend at the time, who was not Jewish, they fled to Prague, Czechoslovakia. Eventually they got married there.
How did the other students at your school treat you?
Hmm?
How did the other students
The
at your
other,
school treat you?
actually, with the exception of very few, I really had no problem. The only thing, you had to be very careful what you said, because any place you had to be careful, because people would report, you know, things, and some of them you couldn't trust. I mean, but the majority of my friends, you know, they were still my friends.
Did you have any non-Jewish friends, or?
Yeah, only because in the school I was in, there were maybe, well, my older sister of mine was at the same school, and there was another Jewish girl. There were maybe three Jewish girls in the whole school. But I had no problems really in school.
Did your friends that weren't Jewish, did they know you were Jewish? And
I think so, because where we were in school, the majority of non-Jews were Lutheran, and so they actually taught religion in school. So while the others had religious class, I was off, and there was another girl who was a Catholic. We didn't have to go. We had a free time, and we usually spent it together. So,
what was your family's, like, how religious was your family? Like, what was your religious, how religious was your family? Like, what background were you? Like, Orthodox, conservative?
my father had the largest practice in you know, where we were. The practice extended really over a lot of small villages and towns in the area, which, so his patients were all over the place. And also in Germany they had insurance, sickness insurance, you know, people who were employed and insured. And my father, of course, had these insurances. Fortunately, he could keep them. And The only thing he lost, he was also what they called a Vertrauensarzt for the sickness insurances. It means people who were sick and they would have to see a insurance, a doctor who would decide whether they're ready to go back to work. And my father had to do that, he had to go into town to do that. But this he lost because he was Jewish. But he still could treat people, who were insured. So.
What was your relationship? You mentioned you had 7 brothers and sisters. What was your relationship with them like?
Oh, we were okay. I was, I guess, closer to my 2 youngest brothers because we were the 3 youngest, But actually, I shared a room with 2 of my older sisters. And actually, the second oldest, she married in 1935, and she moved to Berlin. And in fact, that's how I managed to go to Berlin in '36 to the Olympics and get tickets. So, yeah, we were in good terms. And
what about your parents? What was your relationship like with your parents?
I had a wonderful relationship with my father. In fact, every morning I used to join him in his bed. We used to read the paper together and discuss all kinds of things. And also, we kids, we would get a piece of chocolate in the morning at my father's. So it was nice. And of course, my mother, she did all the cooking, and we did have help, and we were actually small. We had two girls, one do the cleaning and one we were small to take care of us children. And my father, when first he did not have his own car to visit his patients, so he had actually a rental with a chauffeur who would take. I mean, I think when he first started, he used to do it he had a bicycle. He was going around on a bicycle to visit his patients. But then, and eventually he did get a car and he drove himself. And I remember when we used to like to join him, because when he was finished with his visits, we would stop at in Mühle-Zöbiger, which was a restaurant, and we would get some cake and stuff, So of course we were very anxious to do that. And sometimes if you would stay too long, well, we thought it was too long, we had to wait too long, we'd start honking the horn, which of course he didn't appreciate.
What was your favorite food?
My favorite food? No. I can't remember. Well, what I liked very much was they had very good cold cuts, and the bread, German bread was very good. In fact, where we lived, there was a bakery. The owner of the house where we lived was the baker who lived below us. We actually had the whole first floor, which were 2 apartments. The wall was broken, so because we needed the room for 7 kids, And the next floor, there was another apartment where my father had his practice. So it was right in the same building. And used to have hours in the morning and sometimes at night too.
Did your family keep kosher?
No. Mm-mm. Although both my parents were raised in kosher household, but I think my father, when he got away from home and was a student studying medicine in Leipzig, he studied because he had, there were relatives there. And I guess he started to eat not kosher food, and so we did not have kosher at home. I mean, we got Jewish food and things, but it was not, certainly was not kosher.
Did your family belong to a synagogue, and what was your involvement?
Hmm?
What was your involvement with the synagogue? Were you part of the synagogue?
Well, as I said, you know, where we lived in Germany, actually our grade from religious school had to be on our regular school grades. So when I started school, we also started religious school. I mean, we belonged to the Jewish community in Leipzig, and I went twice a week. I had to go to town for a religious school. We learned Hebrew and, you know, the biblical stories and so forth. And in 1935, I was confirmed at the synagogue in Leipzig with a group of other girls. And my brothers had bar mitzvah, you know, in the synagogue in Leipzig. And the main synagogue we belonged to, there was considered liberal, like not reformed, like conservative here. I mean, the only difference between the Orthodox and where we went, was I think that we had an organ, because men and women could not sit together, and the service was in Hebrew, and except for the sermon it was German, otherwise it was all in Hebrew. And they had a choir, or in fact my father and my sister, who before she was married, they were members of the choir. And we used to, you know, attend services there all the time. And, so, as I said, in 1937, I finished school where I was, and you know, the Jewish kids were kicked out of the regular schools. In Leipzig there was a Jewish school. It's a first grade and then also you know, high school. And they needed teachers. And since I was very active in physical, I love physical education. And there was a special course in Stuttgart, Germany, for, it was a one-year course to make you a physical education teacher. And I went there to take that course. And I was there from, well, Easter 37 until Easter 38. And when I came back, I got a job at the Jewish school in Leipzig as a physical ed teacher. And I taught all grades. In fact, in the older classes, they were older than I was. Excuse me. Higher services. Yes. Yes. Yeah, thank same to you. Yeah. As far as I know, are you supposed to receive more than one? Are you getting Social Security too? You got two checks, and which check is not coming? Here, have a good holiday, bye. All right. Old, I don't know what
So, how old were you when you were teaching physical education?
When I started teaching?
Yeah.
Well, my birthday's in November, so Easter '38, I was not quite 18 yet. So in the higher grades, really in the top grades in the Jewish school, some of the students were older than I was. And I felt kind of strange among the, the other teachers. I felt a little bit out of place. But I enjoyed it. So in '38, Hitler annexed Austria, marched into Austria and became part of Germany. And in Austria, the anti-Jewish measures were much worse because he started right away.
What were your family's political affiliations?
Hmm?
What were your parents and your siblings?
I don't think my father was too political. I really don't remember. Don't remember too much about the parties. I mean, there were quite a few communist parties, socialists, all kinds. But I guess I was so young then that I really wasn't too interested in it. I don't remember too much about it. So also in '38, my parents, Jews, had to report all what their assets, what they owned, their belongings were. And then, I think it was in October '38, the Nazis rounded up, there were quite a few Polish Jews living in Germany, but to become a German citizen was almost impossible. It was very difficult. And so, of course, they were still Poles. So they rounded them up. We had quite a few in Leipzig because of the fur trade, which was very big there. Also, we had trade fairs, one in spring and one in fall, which really were international fairs. It was very interesting. And they rounded up, picked them up, and deported them to Poland. They closed up their apartments, sealed them, And a few, in fact, there was a friend of mine who saved themselves of being deported. There was a Polish consulate in Leipzig, and they went to the consulate, and of course the area where the consulate was, the Nazis couldn't go in because it was considered Polish ground. And so they saved themselves this way from deportation. But after a couple days, the Poles wouldn't let them in anymore. And they started to come back. And I remember my father having a car that he went to the station in Leipzig and to help, picking up these returning Polish Jews, and they were taken to the Jewish school because they couldn't go back to where they lived because it was locked and sealed. And the result of this so-called Polen-Aktion was Crystal Night, because one of the deported Jews were parents of this young man, I forgot his name now, in Paris, who shot the German Van Raat, I guess he was working at the German embassy in Paris, and killed him. And that started into Crystal Night. And the way we found out was at 6 o'clock on November 9th, my father had a bell downstairs, a so-called night bell. So if people needed him, because, for instance, he would deliver, I don't know how many thousands of babies he delivered in his years of praxis, so they could ring the bell, and our bell rang at 6 o'clock in the morning on November 9th, and the young man came chasing up, and my father, went to the door to talk to him, and he told him that he's just coming from town, and you can't imagine what's going on. The synagogue is burning. The Nazis are arresting all the Jewish men, and they're smashing up all the Jewish stores and windows, and stealing everything that isn't nailed down. So that's how we found out about what was happening, because my father was not picked up, but an uncle of mine was picked up from his home in Leipzig, and he was sent to the concentration camp of Buchenwald. And they were able to get him out, I think, in December, because my cousin, one of her brother had immigrated. He was in Israel, but she was in England, and she got a visa for her father to come to England, so he was released, but he died pretty soon after he got to England, because I guess the concentration camp finished him up. And my boyfriend, he was also living in Leipzig, and he told me the following story. He had just been released from the hospital after 6 weeks of quarantine because he had contracted polio. He was in Berlin to get his U.S. visa, and when he came back, he got sick and was hospitalized. So the Nazis, they came to their apartment, and they wanted to pick up his father, but his father was very gravely ill, and so they took one look at him, and he was in bed, it was, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning when they came, and so they took one look and said, well, he's going to croak soon anyway, and they left him alone. And as they were going out, they saw a picture of my boyfriend, so they asked his mother, so who is this? She said, it's my son. And said, where is he? Well, she said, he's in his bedroom. So we take him. And so they opened up the door to his bedroom, and my boyfriend said, you better don't come in. I said, I was just released from the hospital after 6 weeks, polio, and it was highly contagious. And so what they did, they found out who his doctor was he had a Gentile doctor, so they called his doctor at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they asked him if the Jew Weinberger is a patient of his. He said, yes. I said, can we take him? He said, what depends what you do. If you put him in a cell and leave him alone, okay. Otherwise, I couldn't take the responsibility, so they left him. He was lucky.
How old was he?
Let's see, how old was Hans in 1938? He was 23.
Was he Jewish?
Oh, yes.
How did
Much
you
so, yeah. Otherwise they would have picked him up. Well, in the area where he lived, in the building, I think there were only Jewish people in the apartment house. In fact, on the first floor, ground floor, there was a man, also a Jewish man. They wanted to pick him up too, and he had lost a leg in World War I. And when they came and opened it, he had his wooden leg in his hand, and they didn't take him. He would have hit him. So.
How did you meet?
Hmm?
How did you meet?
How did we meet?
Yeah.
Well, we belonged to the same sport club. Yeah. And so we met. And in fact, we started going together in well, actually, I met him too through my older sister Ruth, because they worked together in the same store at one time. Before my sister, later she changed. She became a nurse. She went to Berlin to the Jewish hospital to become a nurse. And but also we belonged to the same sport club. It was in 1937. I went to was a swimming meet that was in Hindenburg, and was quite a distance. Was in Upper Silesia, and the Nazis, such bastards, they had put ink or something in the pool, so it couldn't use them. They had to let out all the water, clean it, and refill it. Actually, he also went, and we kind of started going together from then on. And in fact, when I went in Stuttgart, he came to visit Stuttgart. At that time, he had a motorcycle, so we rode a motorcycle.
What happened to the sports club when the Nazis came?
Well,
How did it
eventually,
close
I
down?
guess. Stopped, I would think, I mean, I left March 1st, '79. My father had to turn in his license. He couldn't work anymore. So my sister in Berlin, she suggested they had applied for a visa for Bolivia. So that was a problem too, because you wanted to leave, but you couldn't get a visa to go anyplace. And fortunately we did, because my father was thinking of, he had, during World War I, he had made connections in France, because he was at the Western Front too, as a physician. And he thought, maybe going to France, thank God we didn't. And we got visa for Bolivia, and we left on March 1st. And one of my sisters went to England. And my oldest had gone to Czechoslovakia, she was in Prague, and the second one was in Berlin, and they went to Bolivia. And my sister Ruth and my two brothers and I, we were supposed to all go to Bolivia. And she wanted to stay until the last minute in Berlin because of the boyfriend. And after an infectious ear operation, she pricked her finger with an instrument, and she was dead within 24 hours because at that time they had no penicillin or any of the drugs which we use now. And I remember my parents went to Berlin, and of course they didn't see her anymore alive. And then we had to leave for Hamburg because our ship, and I went with my parents from Hamburg to Berlin to the funeral of my sister. It was awful.
When was this?
That was, she died in February 39, and we left Germany on March 1st. Our ship left March 1st, 39. So it was not a, I mean, we were glad to leave, although it was pretty difficult because my sister, Irene, who was in London, she was meeting us at, I think our ship stopped in Antwerp. It was a South American ship, was a kind of a half freighter and had about 150 passengers. We were all refugees leaving for Jewish refugees. And we had to break the news to her that Rose, who was supposed to be with us, that she had died. It was pretty horrible. And my boyfriend left Germany in January 39. And 2 weeks later his father passed away. Because his father had a brother who immigrated to the States, I think either before World War I or after World War I. And my husband in 37, he went to the States to meet his uncle and to ask him whether he would give him an affidavit, you know, so if he needs to leave Germany. So he did, of course. Although the uncle had married a non-Jewish woman, a Catholic woman, you know, his cousins, they were Catholic.
Where did your boyfriend go?
Huh?
Where did your boyfriend go?
Where did he go? Well, actually, he went, his uncle was in Detroit, but he went to Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, because there was a physician, Jewish physician in Leipzig who we met. He was a psychiatrist who was studying there. And he was in Richmond. That's how he didn't get stuck in New York. He went to Richmond. So anyway, our ship, when we were crossing the Atlantic, it was directed to stop in Baltimore. And so I sent a cable to my boyfriend in Richmond. I said it would be great if you could see each other, you know, we were going to be in Baltimore. So, but I didn't know whether it would work. So we, before we get really docked the ship, immigration people came on the ship. And one of them was talking to one of the passengers, and my father happened to be close by, and he said, there's going to be a wedding on the ship. Mr. Weinberger's getting married. My father either. So Weinberger, boyfriend of my daughter, we have no idea. And I didn't know whether he was going to be there. So anyway, and all the passengers get called in the dining room, and they called me right away. They took my passport away. And when we finally docked, and Hans was there, my boyfriend was there, and he came up the ladder, and he told us what happened. He said while he was waiting for the ship, he got into conversation with the immigration officer who was there, and he asked him, so who are you meeting? And he told him, so my girlfriend. So the immigration officer told him, he said, why don't you get married while she's here? Because then she would get a preference visa. So anyway, what happened? We decided to get married, and the next day, actually the boat was met by women from the National Council of Jewish Women who were very much involved with refugees at the time. I think they still are. In fact, I'm a member of them. And one was the president of the local chapter of Flora Dashu, and the other one who was with her was Irene Sobolov, and her husband was Judge Sobolov. I don't know the name, probably doesn't, but he was a very well-known judge. And so when, we decided to get married, so the two ladies, first of all, there was a 48-hour waiting time to get a license. And that, of course, we couldn't wait for that. So the two ladies took my boyfriend to Judge Sobolov, and he got him together with the judge who would take care of that, so he could take out a license. And we, as I said, we got married the next day, which was St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1939. And Rabbi Shaw, who was the assistant rabbi at Temple Oheb Shalom at the time, or at that time it was called Uta Place Temple, but it was still Uta Place, the temple. And he married us, and there were some ladies present from Baltimore. And so anyway, we got married, and this was in the paper.
Can I see?
It was still the news post. So of course, I had to leave, go to Bolivia, and separated. I stayed here, went back to Richmond, and well, Bolivia was something else. It was unbelievable. It was, first of all, our ship docked in Chile, in Antofagasta, and then we had to take the train up to La Paz, which was, I don't know how many meters high, and the altitude was to get used to it. I mean, everybody got sick, really, from the altitude. And all the streets were up and down, so you couldn't catch your breath. It took a while to get acclimated. And of course, I had to work, and first worked in a children's home because they had a lot of the immigrant children stayed there because their parents had to get settled and start to work and so forth. And in fact, the lady in charge of the children's home, she was also from Leipzig, so she was a friend of mine, one of my sisters. And then I got a job working for the French commercial attaché, taking care of a little baby girl. She was about 2 years old. And it was at quite a time because she was not housebroken, so and I didn't want to clean her, so I put her in the pot every hour on the hour. And her mother was pregnant with another child, and she would be throwing up every morning, so it wasn't too easy. But then the war broke out, September 1st, 39, and they said they were going back to France, and so I lost my job, and then I got a job with a Bolivian family, but the grandparents came from, on one side, from the wife's side, came from Germany, so there was some German, and I took care, they had 3 children, and took care of the children. It was very, very pleasant. And in November, I got my visa for the U.S., and by that time, my father, they wouldn't let him practice because they were afraid of the competition. So the only way he could practice was by joining the Bolivian army, and that's what he did. And they sent him somewhere in the jungles of Bolivia. He was a major, and I was hoping, you know, to see him before I would leave for the United States, but it didn't work out. So then I had to leave because the visa is only good for 4 months, and I left in February to go to the States. Had a ship going from Chile again, and I arrived in New York. I think it was about beginning of March 3rd or 4th, something like that. And cousins of my husband, they met me at the ship, and I got, went by train, went to Baltimore, and that's how I got to Baltimore. And in the meantime, the lady, the president of the National Council, her husband was in business here in Baltimore, and he had, they were selling sewing machines at that time. There was a lot of clothing manufacturing in Baltimore, and so it was a lot of men's clothing, raincoats, gardeners, ties, and whatever was made here. And so they offered him a job, so that's how we got to Baltimore. He got the job in Baltimore, and been here ever since, with the exception, my husband, of course, was drafted during World War II, and first he was in Texas, Camp Fannin, Texas, and I went down to visit him, and the next day he got transferred to Camp Ritchie in Maryland. And I remember going back on the train from Texas. He was had a sleeper. I was sitting up in the crowded train. In Camp Ritchie, they had a lot of the German Jewish refugees, and they were special training there to, I guess, go back to Europe, and then I guess go behind the lines and stuff like that, you know, because their knowledge of German and so forth. But my husband didn't go overseas. He ended up in the Pentagon, and then in '46 he got a job at the war crimes trials in Nuremberg as an interpreter translator. And at that time the independents couldn't go over yet, so I got myself a job, and I followed in October '46. I was back in Germany, in Munich, working for the civilian censorship division. We were listening to telephone conversations and trying to find black marketeers and Nazis and so forth. And then eventually got a transfer to Nuremberg. And, well, I sat in, listened to some of the trials, and I was able to listen to the doctor's trials and stuff. It was pretty horrible. It was like,
Going back to
Yeah.
before the war, when you were in Germany, how did you hear about what was happening, like with the Nazis and the war starting? And how did you hear about it?
well, of course you saw a lot that was going on, and you heard from other people who witnessed things, and then certain things were in the papers too. And I remember in '38 we had to report all the valuables we had, silver and stuff like that, had to all be turned in. And I remember when we left Germany, all we could take is silverware for as many persons we were, you know, but everything else you had to turn in, you have to leave. And in fact, what they did too, they put a tax on the Jews, and they had to pay for all the stuff the Nazis damaged, you know, all the stores and stuff like that. So and depending on whatever your income was, you had to pay a lot of money. And in fact, to go out, you really couldn't take any money. All we were permitted to take was $4 per person or something like that. That's all the money you could take out. It's unbelievable. When you think about it, I wanted to show you this. This was one of the diplomas I got, that was still Hindenburg before Hitler. You know, for some sports stuff. 32. And this was 33. My name of Cohen right on the swastika. Yeah, they had the news thing every year where you competed. And this was in 1940 in the States. I went to New York to attend they had a sports fest of Jewish, German Jewish. And it's me. Here. people going from Baltimore too. And this was a few years ago. They had this. There was a German paper which was the Aufbau. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It was published in New York, and it was started by German refugees, I guess, in the early 40 or 39. And they were publishing until I don't know how many years ago in New York, maybe 5, 6 years ago. And they had this in one of the Aufbaus in New York, and they said they had it, in their files, their old records, and so they published this. Now the Aufbau is being published in Geneva, Switzerland, and I still get it. I mean, but it's a completely different. I mean, it's still German, but it's quite different than what it used to be. And and of course, what I do here, as I said, I've been. This is also interesting. This is a book that was published in Leipzig, in Germany. It's in German. It says Humans Without Gravestones. And it lists all the people who were deported from Leipzig, and who die, who perish. And in there is an aunt of mine, and also my mother-in-law. Actually, we had all the papers ready for her to go to Cuba, to get a visa for Cuba. And Pearl Harbor came, and she didn't make it, and the Nazis deported her to Riga, and she perished. Who had been arrested, she didn't make it either. She was also,
What did it mean for you when you got this certificate? The certificate that you showed me that has the swastika on it?
Well,
How did you
actually,
feel
I
about
had
that?
some from later. I don't know where they are. Well, it stated that I won something. I mean, just like everybody else, of course. I don't know. See my name on the swastika or something. But I had some from later on also, because as I said, I was very active in sports. And in fact, one of the teachers, he commented about it, whether, he realized. This is from this swimming meet in 1937, where they put the ink in the pool. I don't know if it has my name in there, probably somewhere. And this was an identification card, which I got in Stuttgart.
What was it like when they started, when you had to wear the yellow star? Can you describe, like, what was it like when you had to start wearing the yellow star, and like
I
people
didn't,
around
we
you?
didn't. It was, the only thing what happened to us was in our passports, if you did not have a Jewish first name, they added, I mean, they added the name of Sarah for women. In my German passport, I had it, but I gave it to the Holocaust Museum. And it had, first of all, it had a big J in the passport. And the name of Sarah, Inge Sarah. And with the men, if they didn't have a Jewish name, was they added Israel. So, I mean, and this was our marriage license. And this was taken on the boat, I think, by my husband had a cousin who was here, and he took pictures of us when we got married on the ship. And this is what my husband made before he left Germany, and we each one had of these things where he put the dates on for 2 years, and we were crossing, hoping, you know, that we would get together in 2 years, and we were marking those 2 dates, and we could start in March. And so forth. All kinds of memories.
So when you were in school, did your friends and your schoolmates, did they ever find out, like when the Nuremberg law started, was there any change between like relationships with you and non-Jews and with your family and non-Jews?
Well, as I said, some, but most of them really had no problems in school. You just had to be very careful with, I mean, as I said, what you would talk to, you would be kind of careful what you said to people where you're not quite sure, because they could report it. And, you know, you might get your parents into trouble, and it wasn't worth it. And another thing, I always, when I talk to a group, as I told you, I've been working on claims ever since, well, for more than 50 years. And I usually finish up with the letter I received from one of my clients. And I think I'd like to read it to you, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
We had a little bit of a problem in her claim matter, because the Germans were, whether she really had was deprived of her liberty or and get paid for that, but restricted liberty wasn't paid for. So this letter was written in October 1961. She writes, "Dear Mrs. Weinberger, in the past I have been trying to avoid unpleasant talk about my past, simply because every time I talk about it, I choke up with tears. Everything that happened to me is right before my eyes, and the following night I relive it all over again in my sleep, and when I wake up it is still so real and so painful. But I think it's time I got myself together and put a few things down on paper where nobody can hear me sobbing and no one can see my trembling while all my thoughts are so horrifying. If my English isn't so good, it is thanks to the Nazis. If it wasn't for them, I might not come to America and learn English at all. I probably would have just had a normal life that any child had in Poland. Normal, what does that word mean? I have been kicked and whipped and tortured by Germans since I was 6.5 years old. They have whipped me with a rubber hose many times while standing in line in ghetto to get my few rationed ounces of bread. They put my parents to hard labor in the ghetto away from me while I needed their love and care. I was left to care for myself, to hide ever so often when those German murderers came for an action, which meant death to those many older people and children that they caught. I saw many horrible things in those days while in hiding during an action, such as dragging some of my close relatives, pushing them on those horrible trucks, or the horrifying scene I saw when a Nazi soldier chopped off the head of my mother's sister's only 2 little children with a hatchet that he carried in his boots. I heard the children begging, "Lieber Herr, schenken Sie mir das Leben." And then their deaths came. I knew then that that is going to happen to me any minute if they find me. The horrifying day when they took my father out in the street and shot him because there was no more Reichtum to give them that day. That indescribable dark day for us. That day I will live with all my life. Does anyone know what that means? I guess all that seemed to me like still being free after what we had in hiding at the Kowaliks' sort of grave while still alive. Days like the days of Judenrein. What a horror that was, I can't even begin to put it on paper. Little things like shining the murderous soldiers' boots and washing the sides of their trucks and being kicked to hurry up. Yes, all these things seemed little after what had in hiding at the Kowaliks, that inhuman hole in the ground that we spent almost 2 years, is humanly impossible to describe. Hunger and fear of being found out was everyday pain. Oh God, those aches and pains while lying on that wet and cold ground for 2 long winters. The pains were unbearable in my legs, arms, and shoulders. The comb didn't go through my hair for 2 years. My face and body didn't get washed for 2 years. The little dress I escaped in became shreds. The itching, the hunger, the pains, the fear and agony. If I lived 1,000 years, I couldn't forget that. Yes, my life has been damaged forever. Dear Mrs. Weinberger, I dread the night. During the day, I can pretend to be normal. I'd like to be like every American girl. People don't like to be with you when you cry and complain. And many times, my little girl and other children in the neighborhood asked me, did I play school or hide and seek when I was their age? I look at them and smile and think of the way I played hide and seek with the Germans only because I was born a Jew. The way I played school. I remained ignorant, not knowing the letter A till I was 11 years old. Why? Because I was a Jew and the Nazis said no few Jews in Polish schools. I have tried to absorb knowledge ever since as much as possible. My brother even became a psychologist so that maybe he can understand why the Germans did what they did to us. But try as we may, only God knows why. Now, unfortunately for the Germans, I'm alive, and they are trying to figure out which part of the 5 years of my suffering was the worst, which part should they call freedom or liberty. If any of it was considered liberty or freedom, I wish it on all those responsible for that kind of freedom I had. They should have it the rest of their lives. I'm too upset to go on, Mrs. Weinberger, so I call it quits. I couldn't write all I lived through in those 5 years if I lived 1,000 years. I hope you didn't mind my letter too much. I want to thank you for listening to me on paper. I remain yours truly. Yeah, I heard so many stories since I've processed claims. My own story is nothing. So, as I said, these are all cases we processed, and there are already lots of cases which we were closed to be turned over to the Jewish Museum. They have files there, and once in a while I have to get to them. And I think there are quite a few turned over to them again. So what else, do you have any questions I can answer, or what else you would like to know?
When you were a kid, what did you know about